Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So the European Union has told Theresa May that a crucial part of her Brexit Chequers proposal simply will not work. That verdict came at the end of the Salzburg summit, where the Prime Minister had been hoping to sell the plan to EU leaders when she spoke to them over dinner last night. This morning, though, the 27 leaders met in her absence and agreed their tough line. Theresa May's response, declaring her Chequers proposal was still the only credible proposition on the table. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Salzburg. Gary.
Well, Theresa May really has been ambushed here. This was not how this summit was meant to go. She thought it was a moment that would de-escalate tensions over Brexit, bring the sides further together, end up with a bit of progress, maybe even a timetable towards a deal, bring that into view, even if the shape of the deal wasn't entirely clear. She was going to achieve that by appealing over the heads of the Eurocrats, as they're called, the European Commission, to national leaders who would see things her way, who understand the economics of frictionless trade and the need to stay close and the rest of it. Well, she tried it last night and it didn't work. Tonight they came out at their press conferences and in various statements saying that her Chequers plan still wasn't acceptable. Theresa May's theory about why this has happened is that it is them, the EU, playing hardball. This is tactics in the negotiations. She came to a press conference looking visibly angry, I have to say, and made that point in language, you know how cautious she is, in language which was pretty unfamiliar. She pretty much said that the plans that the EU had come up with were not serious, not credible. So it leaves you at the end of this summit wondering, is this a blip, a pretty major blip, but just a tactical thing? Are the assurances that European leaders, London says, have been giving to Theresa May, that they really do want a deal and they think one is viable, are those assurances going to come back on track, not least with Theresa May unveiling some of her additional proposals quite soon on the backstop and regulation between Northern Ireland and Britain? Could this all just be swept away, or is this a case of Britain, as some would argue it has done in the past, completely misreading European leaders, maybe misjudging how much, for them, the politics of the EU project regularly trumps economics? This is how day 2 of the Salzburg summit went. After 28 leaders posed for the group photo, nearly all of them went back to the meeting room for the next session. One leader said her goodbyes. Theresa May wasn't allowed back in for their next discussion about her Brexit plan. But she waited around, keen to make a last good impression on leaders before they returned to the table. There was an embrace for President Macron, the man Britain believes is leading the hardliners who won't soften the EU position. The kisses don't seem to have worked. With Theresa May safely excluded from the meeting room, Michel Barnier was brought in the front to brief the leaders on the negotiations he's been leading for them. The Salzburg meeting was meant to be the one where tensions reduced and a date for a deal came into view. Instead, there was no special crunch summit announced, and leaders like President Macron emerged saying Chequers was not acceptable. The French president said that was the consensus in the room. And then the European Council president, thought to be friendlier than some to the British position, confirmed that.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work.
At her press conference, Theresa May appeared angered and suggested the EU was simply playing hardball.
I have always said that these negotiations were going to be tough. And at various stages of these negotiations, different tactics would be used as part of those negotiations.
She tried a little hardball herself. She was ready to walk out of talks.
But let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, we are preparing for no deal. so that if we get to the position where it is not possible to reach a deal, then the British people can be confident that we will have done what is necessary to ensure we make a success of leaving the European Union, regardless of the terms on which we do so.
Amongst those listening at the door, Ollie Robbins, the chief official negotiating Brexit. On the BBC on Monday, he was heard telling the Prime Minister in a meeting that her Chequers plan was a game changer and was gaining traction across Europe.
Our white paper remains the only serious and credible proposition on the table.
For around 10 minutes last night, Theresa May was allowed to make a plea to leaders for her approach. Number 10 had hoped it might spur the other leaders to assert themselves over the European Commission negotiating team.
I don't think it's the good time to alter the techniques of this process.
She's not going to peel you apart from each other.
No, I don't think that is the method. At the end of the day, it will have to be agreement we'll all have to sign up, so and has to go through the European Parliament. So we need a wide support.
This morning amongst the leaders there was only one outspoken ally for Britain.
We should have a fair approach and to have a good deal with them, how to continue.
I think some of your colleagues are trying to punish them, maybe pushing them.
No, it's a very general approach.
Mr. Orban,
but we have a camp, quite number of countries. Hi, President. Who would? There are some others, like Hungary, who don't like that kind of approach, and we would like to have a fair Brexit.
But for many here, Viktor Orban has near pariah status.
I think the solution to the problem of migration.
Don't let them in, and those who are in, sent home. That's so simple.
Good meeting, but we're a long way off yet.
In reality, the morning meeting between Theresa May and the Irish Taoiseach was said to be anything but good. Theresa May seems to have been surprised by how badly things went here. She's promising new proposals on the regulation checks and Northern Ireland soon. Europe is demanding much more dramatic change and is saying the October summit in 4 weeks' time is the deadline. There had been a hope in Number 10 that this summit would be a shot in the arm for the Chequers proposals. The EU leaders have effectively, I think, shot Theresa May, winged her, maybe shot her in one of her legs. She has only days to go before the Tory party conference, one of the really big tests that this was meant to help her through. Her project now looks truly friendless, and her opponents are already making hay and will be making hay with this next week. What does she do from here? Does she, as she was talking about in that press conference, push ahead with plans for no deal? We know most of the people she admires in government think no deal is a very dark place to go, and she's more or less said that herself in some of her statements. Does she reach, as David Davis, the ex-Brexit secretary, would like her to do, for the free trade agreement he says is sitting nearly in mint condition in the safe in his department? That would be an extraordinary turnaround. She'll probably plough on with her approach, but given how wounded they're feeling in Number 10 tonight, you wonder with what success.
Gary Gibbon in wonderful Salzburg, thanks very much. Well, we sent our chief correspondent Alex Thompson on a road trip today across the great Brexit divide, from the beaches of North Berwick through the Tweed Valley and down into the post-industrial heartland of Ashington and Northumberland. And there was an interesting consensus and message. Just get on with it. Alex is in Ashington first now. Alex, over to you.
Certainly am, Matt. Yes, the memorial pit wheel here in Ashington, in what was once not just the biggest pit village in the UK, but they say the biggest one in the world. And it marks the end of a very varied journey, different landscapes, different industrial and agricultural heritage that we move through today from East Lothian. And of course, different views of Brexit on both sides of the border, as you would expect. We expected division, we expected strongly expressed opinions. Obviously, we got those, but we didn't expect that message coming from both sides, from Brexiteers and Remainers alike. And it's a pretty strong message, albeit, I should stress, completely unscientific, of course. Pretty strong message to the Prime Minister.
Somehow timeless and tranquil this morning, where the Firth of Forth unwinds into the North Sea. Craigleith on one side, the amazing Bass Rock on the other, and right behind me the Isle of May. See what we did there? And this, on shore, of course, North Berwick. And in North Berwick, more people voted to remain in the EU than almost anywhere else in the UK. Among the early morning dog walkers, a Remainer businessman who said what so many would tell us today on both sides of the divide.
At the end of the day, we had a vote. The vote is to go out and do something else, so let's get on with it.
And of course that Remain refrain. How do we function without imported EU labour?
Living in an area like this and talking to farmers that I know who say that they couldn't get their crops in without people coming from Eastern Europe, who are a tremendous workforce. Yes, it needs to be controlled, but we still need these people to help us, and we help them.
With an elderly, affluent demographic, North Berwick tells a certain story. But we had to get south, moving on through East Lothian to Dunbar, where the food hamper cafe was already packed. A younger, less affluent clientele here. Timothy Staples, Brexit then, Brexit now.
We contribute a hell of a lot more than, say, some of the emerging European countries that come into it in EU. We subsidise a lot. So surely, if we're not subsidising, that's better for us financially, surely.
And of course here, the strong sense from many that Brexit England just isn't listening anymore to Remain as Scotland. You sound like you feel left out.
We do feel left out. It's because obviously we have our say on certain things, but it's just like it's, you know, when it comes to Westminster, they make all our decisions, but then we've got differences, so like our NHS is different, our school system's different, but when it comes to what we want, it's like, oh no, you don't matter. You know, we don't need to listen to Scotland, they don't matter.
South again over the Tweed from majority Remain Scotland to majority Brexit England. And then west, up into the rolling fells of the Chequers, farming country. And if there were any tractors out today, Channel 4 News were there to get in their way.
Just have to get on with it because they're going to do it anyway, whether it's I voted against it. I didn't want it, but obviously more people did want it, so I don't know.
Just got to get the best deal we can.
Just have to try, yes.
Again that thought, and again from a Remainer, just get on with it. 50 miles south, we sense another John Deere out there planting winter cereals. We'd soon put a stop to that. No time to lose.
I've been a restaurant manager, bar managers, I've managed nightclubs, been a school teacher. I voted to leave. I've spent 8-10 hours a day in the car listening to the radio, and it's all about Brexit, 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 Brexit.
Are you happy with it, the progress?
Well, my view on it's very simple. What we're waiting for, let's just get out.
And then into the old industrial belt of South Northumberland. But the days of winning deep-seam coal here in Ashington are long gone, the stuff of memory and heritage. Northumberland generally is a strongly Brexit area.
I think the EU's just too greedy. They want too much money.
Too greedy?
Too greedy.
Too expensive for the UK? Rosalie Robinson was Brexit. Now, though, she's not so sure.
Well, I just thought, really, probably listening to a lot of people, and a lot of people will say, no, we'll do it, leave, it'll be better off, but I don't know if we are.
Even so, Rosalie, like so many we heard from today, from the beaches of North Berwick to the mining legacy of Northumberland, said those 5 words: just get on with it. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Ashington.
If Theresa May thought tough language and tough tactics would persuade her fellow EU leaders of the merits of her Chequers plan for Brexit, she was left in no doubt today. They did not like it one little bit. She went in hard last night, saying it was the only plan on offer, and she went in high, in effect going over the head of the EU's chief negotiator, possibly a bit of a mistake. Not only did the European Council President Donald Tusk say it was not work, in a flash of something approaching anger, France's President Macron said British voters had been lied to by Brexiters about how easy it would be to leave the EU. So where does all this leave us tonight? Well, potentially indeed heading for a no-deal exit with the possibility of another referendum before we get there, just to be sure it's really what we want.
She knew it would be a hard sell. British diplomats are fully aware of Europe's reservations about her Chequers plan. But Theresa May hadn't expected this, an outright rejection of a proposal that she insists is the only one on offer. Council President Donald Tusk didn't mince his words.
While there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work. not least because it risks undermining the single market.
Other leaders were saying the same, that the Chequers plan is dead. But what followed was the sort of denial of reality last seen from this Prime Minister during the most troublesome days of the general election campaign.
Yes, concerns have been raised. I want to know what those concerns are. There's a lot of hard work to be done, but I believe that there is a willingness to do a deal. But let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, we are preparing for no deal.
Again and again she spoke about being ready for no deal if that intractable problem of the Irish border can't be solved.
Do you wish now that last year you would never agreed to the principle of the Northern Ireland backstop? Because it's caused you no end of trouble, hasn't it?
I think it is absolutely a key part of these negotiations, as I've made very clear, that we deliver for the people of Northern Ireland.
Even if that means no deal?
If there is no agreement on a deal that is acceptable to the United Kingdom, then we're preparing for no deal.
It was as animated as anyone could remember seeing her.
Very hot in that.
And she may not have been talking about the temperature. And if she was bullish about Britain leaving with no deal, then so were the European Commission.
The Commission has prepared in detail all the elements of consequences of a no deal which could be entailed by a no deal. So don't worry, be happy, don't worry.
It seems that Germany's Chancellor Merkel and France's President Macron were happy to authorise this diplomatic humiliation. Macron following up with an extraordinary attack on leading Brexiters. Those who explained we can easily live without Europe and will have more money, he said, are liars. And they left the day after so as not to have to deal with it. As a parting shot, Donald Tusk posted a photo on Instagram of him offering Mrs May a cake. "Sorry, no cherries," read the slightly bitchy tagline. It was a brutal end to a brutal day. The warmth of the farewell kiss from President Macron, not disguising the fact that he's believed to have argued hardest for today's tough line with the British. People are used to EU negotiations that go down to the wire before finding some last-minute compromise. But those have always been negotiations amongst fellow members. This time it's a face-off with a country that is leaving. And waiting for that last-minute extend the deadline fudge may just not work this time. James Mates, News at 10, Salzburg.
Boy, oh boy. Robert's here, of course. We haven't got any cake, I'm afraid, let alone with cherries. What an extraordinary tweet that was. Where do we go from here? What's the plan?
So, look, make no mistake, this is very serious indeed. We had the representative of EU governments, Donald Tusk, not the EU Commission, but the representative of the governments, saying that her Chequers plan for a special customs area and special deals for goods flowing to and from the EU won't work, right? That is their official position. But tonight, the official position of Downing Street, they have told me this, remains that this is just tough negotiating and they will battle on for this plan. Now, everybody that I know, both in Brussels and who is steeped in these negotiations, says that this is ludicrous to be battling on in this way. And the risk, they say, is that we get to October, the deal is still rejected, and we've got nowhere to go except a no-deal Brexit. Now, at the same time, there's a part of her own party, the European Research Group and their sympathisers, who will, in the next few days, put out an alternative plan, which actually paradoxically, because it's based much more on the way that the EU runs things, might be more acceptable to the EU. But the Prime Minister has said categorically she's not going to have.
Okay, so
any
what
of that.
about we go forward, she doesn't get a plan, what is no deal going to be like? Are we going to have another referendum? What is your...
So, I do not myself believe that Parliament will back no deal. OK, there are a fairly substantial number of Tory MPs who think no deal would not be a disaster for the UK. But in terms of Parliament, they are a minority. Now, I think it is conceivable, not conceivable, I think highly likely in those circumstances that Parliament will assert its authority and force a referendum on the government. That, of course, would be the end of her career because she set her face so against a referendum. And for the rest of us, we'd have to make up our own minds again, which millions of British people will not relish. And I have to say, you know, it's not just what joy. The serious point is millions of people who voted for Leave will feel betrayed. And constitutionally and democratically, the stakes will be very high if that happens.
OK, all right, let's see if we get there. Thank you very much indeed for now.
Theresa May's attempt to convince EU leaders of the merits of her plan for Brexit has ended in failure. At the end of the two-day summit in Austria, the Prime Minister was told a crucial part of it, the proposed new economic partnership with the EU, would not work. The head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, said her plans risked undermining the EU's single market. But the Prime Minister insists her proposals are the only serious, credible way to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland. Our political editor, Laura Kuhnsberg, reports from Salzburg.
Following her every move, every step matters. In this spectacle, neither side wants to budge.
Brexit. No, there is no progress. There is only position explained. Standoff still is in place.
As long as there is no deal, there is a risk of a no deal. But I think we all want to work towards a deal, and I still think it is achievable.
She'd hoped for more than jokey small talk. The Prime Minister wanted at least a polite reception for her Brexit compromise, the so-called Chequers plan. But they just don't like her idea to keep part of the economy close to the EU and to try to preserve the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland as it is. Don't doubt, this is 1 against 27.
Es ist heute deutlich geworden, dass wir bis Oktober substanzielle Fortschritte.
From the German Chancellor, a polite rebuff. Substantial progress is needed. The French President said the proposals were not acceptable, and those who said Britain could leave easily were liars. Then, from the boss of the European Leaders Club, few words about a promising start or interesting idea. The UK plan will not stand.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work.
How could she walk back from that rejection? Remember, many of her party at home hate her Brexit plan too. Theresa May could not pretend this afternoon that nothing had changed. Instead, she was cross and frustrated.
Our white paper remains the only serious and credible proposition on the table.
So with the EU against your plan, with large chunks of your party at home against your plan, how can you credibly cling on to the deal you struck at Chequers with your cabinet?
Well, look, I'm negotiating, and I'm negotiating hard in the interests of the British people. Yes, concerns have been raised. I want to know what those concerns are. There's a lot of hard work to be done, but I believe that there is a willingness to do a deal. But let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, you know, we are preparing for no deal.
And have the chances of no deal just gone up?
We are continuing to work for a good deal. I think you will have heard both President Tusk and a number of the EU leaders saying that they are looking and hoping, working to that good deal. But there's a lot of work to be done. It's very hot in that.
It certainly is, Prime Minister. More heat from rival voices trying to force her to ditch her plan.
It's looking very clear. It's going to be very, very difficult to deliver a Chequers strategy that will meet their requirements. So it's time for a reset, time for a rethink.
The Prime Minister can't and won't step away from her proposals yet. But the choreography of doing the deal today has gone badly wrong.
There's plenty of evidence they all want to do a deal, but much less proof that they actually can. And it's not dramatic to say that how Theresa May can resolve her differences with the rest of her counterparts from the continent will have an effect on how we all live our lives for years and years to come.
The UK is on its way out of this club, But Theresa May is finding this a long and lonely way out.
Well, in a moment, we'll get more from Laura. But first, let's speak to our Europe editor, Katya Adler. In terms of Brussels, the rest of the EU leaders, what happens now?
Well, look, let's look first at Theresa May's perspective. And the summit was a bit of a disaster for her. She was hoping for those warm words and she didn't get it. Her critics at home were waiting to see if her Chequers Brexit plan would belly flop in front of the 27 EU leaders. But from the EU perspective, nothing concrete changed here. Their objections to part of the Chequers proposal on the Northern Ireland border and also on future trade relations between the EU and the UK after Brexit were well known, so they weren't new. And at this summit, leaders said they thought a deal would still be possible this autumn. They said concessions would need to be made by both sides, including their own. So despite the upset tonight, Brexit negotiations continue. If enough progress is made on those difficult issues by the EU leaders' next summit next month in October, they say they'll call a special Brexit summit to seal the deal. Now, is this pie in the sky? Surely Theresa May's plan number one now has to be to survive the Conservative Party conference intact.
And Laura, you said that the Prime Minister is flying home tonight into a storm. Just how difficult are the next few weeks and months indeed going to be for the Prime Minister?
Sophie, I think the next 24 and 48 hours will be extremely difficult too. This is acute, not just because the EU leaders voiced their criticisms so strongly, more strongly than Number 10 had been expecting, but because her party at home had already been frothing with anger, concern and fears about the so-called Chequers deal. Not everybody in the Conservative Party was unhappy, of course. There are many MPs in the middle who wanted it to work. But there have been very strong former Remainer voices and Brexiteer voices who have looked at these proposals, said that they just don't stack up, and absolutely have made clear that they will fight them all the way. And lo and behold, here today, the European Union has joined that chorus and said the plans as they stand are not workable. So Theresa May, in a sense, finds herself surrounded by European leaders and people in her own party, just 10 days or so away from the Conservatives' annual gathering, their party conference. She has so little room for manoeuvre. That doesn't, of course, mean that somehow the whole thing is off. A bust-up between the top brass in Europe is not surprising in such a long process. But the timing of this is very embarrassing for the Prime Minister, and the fact that time is running out means there's not very long for her and her officials and the rest of her ministers to find a solution. This is the biggest thing that she has to achieve as leader. She needs authority in order to drive it through, but right now, tonight, it doesn't seem that there's much authority around.
Laura Kunsberger and Katya Adler, thank you.
Tonight, Theresa May's only plan for Brexit, Chequers, appears to be dead. European Union leaders have surprisingly vehemently rejected the Prime Minister's proposals as unworkable, saying that maintaining a common rulebook for goods fundamentally undermines the EU single market. There can be no freedom of movement for goods without similar freedoms for services and people, both of which are excluded from Chequers. European Council President Donald Tusk said he was still optimistic about a positive outcome and that compromise was needed on both sides. But a visibly frustrated Theresa May insisted there was no counter-proposal on the table. And in some extraordinary remarks, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, said that the problems the UK faced showed that those who said Brexit would be easy and make Britain richer were liars. So where does this leave us? Nick Watt spent the day in Salzburg.
A tolling of the bell as Europe's leaders emerged into the midday sun. Hidden at the back, in red, was the outsider who was about to discover the high price of wanting to leave their club. Breaking up was never going to be easy, and today it just got a lot harder. The shop steward for EU leaders rejected the central element of Theresa May's Brexit blueprint.
We agreed to have a joint political declaration that provides as much clarity as possible on the future relations. Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, The suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work, not least because it risks undermining the single market.
A friendly encounter earlier in the day, but a few hours later, Emmanuel Macron echoed that message.
There is simply one important point: the nature of the future economic relationship. These proposals are unacceptable because they do not respect the integrity of the single market.
The intervention by EU leaders marked a brutal takedown of Theresa May's central Brexit strategy to forge the closest possible trading relationship with the EU whilst taking back control of Britain's laws and borders. And her main claim about this summit, that her Chequers plan would mark a good starting point for the final phase of negotiations, well, that was shattered.
Allies did their best to be helpful, but the reservations were clear.
As an old friend of the UK, are you impressed that Theresa May took some big steps in Chequers, or are you exasperated?
I acknowledge the fact that Theresa May is really trying to put some serious proposals on the table, and the Chequers proposal is a serious proposal. However, looking more into detail into these proposals, there are various questions, and even some cardinal questions, and even maybe some difficulties. The Chequers proposal in itself is helpful, but it's not the outcome.
This was the moment, after a one-on-one meeting with Donald Tusk, that Theresa May digested the EU's blunt message, and her anger was not difficult to detect.
So yes, concerns have been raised. I want to know what those concerns are. There's a lot of hard work to be done, but I believe that there is a willingness to do a deal. But let nobody be in any doubt that, as I've always said, we are preparing for no deal. So that if we get to the position where it is not possible to reach a deal, then the British people can be confident that we will have done what is necessary to ensure we make a success of leaving the European Union, regardless of the terms on which we do so.
Downing Street believes the EU is embarking on classic hardball negotiating tactics. The EU says Theresa May needs to address two key points. Her proposal for an ongoing harmonisation with EU rules on goods would, in their eyes, undermine the single market, which binds goods and services together. A proposal for the UK to collect EU tariffs has also been thrown out. The Prime Minister's determination to stick by her Brexit red lines means the only way to avoid a hard border in Ireland is for checks on goods travelling between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the EU says.
What assurances can you offer to the UK, who say the current EU27 backstop would create a border within the United Kingdom between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and no Prime Minister could agree to two customs territories on their sovereign territory?
Well, I understand Prime Minister May wants to come up with suggestions or proposals that avoid that. Again, I'm not looking to create borders anywhere. I don't want new borders between North and South in Ireland. I don't want new borders between Ireland and Britain. I don't want borders between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. It's Brexit that has caused this problem, and we're the ones who are trying to resolve it.
This evening, a bruised Theresa May took her leave of the summit. But this battle-hardened Prime Minister believes there's still all to play for. Soon, there will be fresh UK proposals on the Irish border.
Well, you saw Leo Varadkar there. In a moment, we'll be hearing live from his deputy, Ireland's Foreign Minister Simon Coveney, and our political editor Nick Watt, who's in Salzburg. But first, a cabinet response. Earlier, I spoke to the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling. He was an early backer of Theresa May for the Tory leadership and a prominent Vote Leave campaigner. But crucially, he decided to stay in the cabinet following the Chequers agreement. Later on in the programme, I'll be talking to him about the chaotic summer on Britain's railways. But first, here's what he told me when I asked whether following Salzburg we were now closer to a no deal.
Well, I think we're just in the midst of a negotiation where people are setting out robust, firm positions. And this is often the way with negotiations with the European Union. They build up, there's tough language, actually a deal is done at the last. And I'm still confident we will reach a point where there is an agreement.
But in order to reach that point, is Chequers going to have to be watered down? It's not going to be going the other way, is it?
Well, no, the Prime Minister has been very clear that the deal on the table is Chequers. I mean, you've seen that it is challenging enough within the UK.
Changed. I mean, Donald Tusk has been absolutely clear about this. Chequers will not work.
Well, we've put forward the only proposal that we believe meets the UK's red lines and also provides the right solution for the Irish border. At the moment, what the European Union is asking in and around Northern Ireland is simply impossible for any UK government to accept. And actually, if they stick with that position, there will be no deal, because no UK government, certainly not this one, the Labour Party said the same, could possibly accept any kind of border in the Irish Sea.
You were one of 6 cabinet ministers under David Cameron who campaigned hard for Brexit, and you wanted a hard Brexit. Would you stay in cabinet if any concessions are made on Chequers?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not going to comment on specific changes to Chequers. There are none on the table at the moment. There are things that I wouldn't personally accept, but nor would the Prime Minister. Or the Prime Minister set out red lines that this country is not going to stay in the single market. We're not going to stay in the customs union. I agree with her on those, but that's the government's position. You know, we're not going to accept a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. At the end of the day, we are now preparing hard for the option of a no-deal Brexit. We don't want to get there, we don't expect to get there, but our European partners, if they want to reach a deal, are going to have to find a way of understanding that there are some things the United Kingdom cannot accept.
We are in a position where Donald Tusk has said today the maximum progress has to be made by the full Council of Ministers meeting next month. That is 4 weeks. And he is essentially saying to Theresa May, go away and think again, do something different. That's what he said.
And what she is saying is that the European Union will need to now evolve its position if we're going to reach an agreement. At the moment, they're asking for things the United Kingdom cannot accept and will not accept. But we want to reach an agreement. We think we can reach an agreement together. We think that the Chequers proposals provides the basis for an agreement. I've also always thought that this deal will be reached at the last moment after much tough talk, which tends to be the way the European Union
So you're prepared to give on Chequers?
I'm not prepared to give on the principles the Prime Minister has set out that are absolutely essential to the United Kingdom, and most particularly, we're not prepared to concede a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. That's simply something no British government could ever accept.
And we'll be hearing again from Christopher Grayling later in the programme. I'm joined now by Simon Coveney, the Taoiseach and Ireland's Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade. He joins me live from Cork, and on the line from Salzburg, our political editor, Nick Watt. Good evening, Simon Coveney. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You would have heard the Taoiseach saying there in our film from Salzburg that he was trying to resolve the situation. How is Ireland helping to resolve the situation?
Well, I mean, Ireland is part of the EU negotiation team, but of course we're also a close neighbour and friend of the United Kingdom. While we deeply regret that the UK have decided to leave the EU, we now want to try and figure out a way of doing that that's good for Britain, but also protects key Irish interests. And we cannot have, as an unintended consequence of Brexit, something that is damaging to Ireland. And, you know, the issue that has been of most concern in these negotiations so far has been the prospect of the re-emergence of a physical border on the island of Ireland, which we think would cause a lot of tension and would have a corrosive effect on relationships between communities north and south. And I think many people in the United Kingdom who understand the fragility of the peace process in Ireland, which is 20 years old this year, understand why that is so important. But the solution to that was a commitment initially that was made last December by the British government, whereby they said if we couldn't find an agreed way to resolve the border issue, well then the UK would maintain full alignment with the rules of the customs union and single market in the areas necessary to allow for north-south cooperation, to allow for an all-island economy and to protect the peace process. And so then in March, the Prime Minister agreed in writing to Donald Tusk that backstop arrangement, or that insurance mechanism, if you like, would be part of a legally operable text in the withdrawal treaty. And that is what we're trying to finalise now. And the EU negotiating team and the UK negotiating team haven't found... Yeah, in the event,
in the end of not a deal, but do you understand why it's completely unacceptable? Sorry, Minister. Do you understand it's completely unacceptable to draw a line in the Irish Sea, which essentially separates Britain from Northern Ireland? We are one united kingdom.
But nobody is asking for that, Kirsty, with respect. We don't want borders down the Irish Sea or borders on the island of Ireland. We want to maintain the free trading relationship that we have with the United Kingdom, which is worth about 70 billion euros a year to Ireland. We have 38,000 companies in Ireland that trade with Britain every single month, and most of them every single week. And there are a similar number in the UK trading into Ireland. So that is a relationship we want to maintain. But Britain has chosen to leave the customs union and the single market, and that creates complexities. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to resolve those complexities in a way that does not undermine in any way the sovereign integrity of the United Kingdom, but at the same time ensures that the commitments that have been made by the British Prime Minister, to her credit, because I think she understands Northern Ireland, that nothing she does or the decisions that she makes will have an unintended consequence of the re-emergence of a border on the island of Ireland. And this is why the backstop has now become such an important issue as part of a withdrawal treaty, which, by the way, and just to give you some positive news for your listeners, the withdrawal treaty between the EU and the UK is 90% agreed. It's the last 10% which is difficult and which is political. And which still needs a legally operable text, which unfortunately we don't have.
And the last 10% could scupper it. Because what, Chris Grayling said quite clearly is Chequers is the deal. Chequers is it. It may be a bit of movement round about the edges, but the way the Chequers deal has been configured is the only story on the table from Theresa May's side.
Yeah, but Kirsty, I think you're misrepresenting what needs to be agreed between now and when Britain leaves on the 29th of March next year. There is going to be no vote on Chequers anywhere between now and then. Chequers is about the future relationship, which hasn't been settled on yet. Chequers is the British government's settled approach now towards what they want to see in the future relationship. The EU may have different views in different areas. Donald Tusk made it clear that there are positive elements to Chequers that the EU welcomes.
Security
but there are
so
elements
forth.
in terms of the economic relationship that's being proposed that EU leaders feel potentially undermines the single market. Now that's the basis of a negotiation, and this is the key issue, because I think it's not understood by many people. What's required between now and the end of the year, and hopefully what can be done between now and the next EU summit in October, is actually to try and finalise the text on the withdrawal treaty, which is the legal document that provides the initial certainty after Britain leaves the European Union. And with that, there also needs to be a detailed political statement in terms of what the future relationship is likely to look like, and that's where Chequers comes in.
Just, sorry to interrupt you, but just a final point here in terms of tone. We heard some pretty stiff words from Emmanuel Macron. You'll have seen, or perhaps you haven't seen, there's a put on an Instagram account, Donald Tusk's personal Instagram account, which is a picture of himself with Theresa May, and it's, at the top it says a piece of cake perhaps, underneath it says, sorry, no cherries. Is there a way in which this is about, intentionally or not by some people, humiliating Theresa May in Salzburg?
Well, I certainly hope not. The Irish relationship with the United Kingdom is one that we value. Britain is our closest friend and our closest neighbour. I've spent quite a bit of my life living in the United Kingdom and working there, as indeed have many Irish people. What we want is the closest possible relationship with Britain after these negotiations and after Brexit. That is what other countries in the European Union want also. But the European Union and Donald Tusk and people like Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier have to also protect the integrity of the EU's single market and customs union for the 27 countries that are staying in the EU. That's the job that they have to do.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've run straight out of time. Thank you. I'm sorry to have to cut you off there. We're joined now by our political editor, Nick Watt, in Salzburg. What do you make of that, both the Chris Grayling and Simon Coveney, and what's been happening today?
Well, I think we have one very angry Prime Minister. I think she feels that she was ambushed here today. But as far as she's concerned, the show does go on. And off the back of what the Taoiseach was saying, the UK will be putting forward some more proposals on the Irish border. But I think the big question for Downing Street at the end of today is it does raise questions about the Prime Minister's biggest calculation, which is that the EU would offer the UK a special bespoke deal. The EU all along has always said there are variations for you on the two proposals on the shelf. Norway, very close. Canada, slightly distant. Nothing else is on the table apart from a no deal, is the message from the European Union. And really, Theresa May will sort of, over the next few months, have to show whether she can do better than that. But the EU's pretty clear, no special treatment.
Nick Watt, thanks very much indeed.